Welcome. You're listening to the Good Girls Don't podcast with Ashley Ray
and Verity Mansfield.
This is the podcast where we smash those rules that we've been taught to follow both as men and women and burn the damn rule book. We're tackling the big issues and the issues nobody wants to talk about, and we'll be fiercely feminist about it.
This podcast is about inspiration, education, compassion, and being the change that you need to see in this world. This podcast is for the trailblazers, the freedom fighters, and the soul igniters, and all the women just like you who are ready to break the good girl rules and be heard.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of Australia and its First Nations people on which this podcast is produced and consumed. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.
Get ready for the revolution. It's coming to you now. It's coming to you now. You're gonna see an evolution. And they'll never bring us down. No, they'll never bring us down.
Verity, welcome to 2020. How are you?
How good is it to be back?
It's so good. And I'm still laughing because we tried to record this and Verity didn't have her microphone turned on, which made it really hard.
Yeah, we've been trying to figure out what the problem was with my microphone for the last 20 minutes, and I just realised I forgot to turn it on, which is a brilliant way to start 2020.
Which kind of makes it... Well, yeah, let's be honest. It's been a bit of a rough start to 2020.
And it has. You know, we've had the bushfires across Australia. Ashley and I have both had personal things going on with friends passing and you know, other traumatic experiences. And it has been, I mean, we're only the beginning of the year. We're not even past the first month. And, you know, it's been a really full-on year. But I think it's also instigated so many amazing conversations between Ashley and I. And we're so excited to be inspired to bring forth so many more amazing episodes for you, and you know, with a whole lot of different topics and themes that everyone can really sink their teeth into.
Oh, I can't wait for some of the stuff we've got in the pipeline.
Yeah, really, really inspiring stuff.
Yeah, that brings us to today. And today we're kicking off 2020 by talking to a gorgeous woman, Tzara Atwell, about infidelity and what that means, and all of just, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just infidelity, the taboo of everything that goes with it.
Yeah, so many of us don't talk about infidelity. And I think it's one of those things, like, if it happens to us, we're so ashamed that we're not worthy of our partner's love. Like, we take it as such a personal attack on our self-worth that we don't talk about it, that we hide it, or we ignore it, or we run away with it and we don't deal with it. And I think this was what was so powerful about this episode today, is we had three women with three very different experiences all around infidelity. There's Ashley, who experienced infidelity and stayed and fought for her relationship and healed and moved forward, you know, creating a really beautiful, healthy relationship. There's Tzara, that walked away consciously from a very toxic relationship. And there's myself, who ran away, went into full flight, ran away with fear, never had a conversation about it, and then regretted the fact, you know, for years, that I might have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And it is because we don't sit as women and talk and share our stories about infidelity. It's such a taboo topic, and it's so sad. It's so sad we don't talk about this. I heard a statistic the other day, and I don't know how true it was, that something like 80% of couples experience infidelity.
Yeah, it's huge, but also, like,
it's massive.
I kind of look at that statistic and I say, I'm not sure that we're supposed to be loyal to like one person our entire life. Like, that's going to be extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah, and we do have a juicy conversation coming up with that about open marriages in the next few weeks. So watch out for that one.
Exactly. But you know what was really interesting about this conversation is none of us realized that we each had these different experiences coming to the conversation. So I think there's some really amazing things that come out because we didn't go into this knowing that Verity had her experience, I had mine, and Tzara had hers. Like, we knew Tzara had an experience. We weren't entirely sure what that was going to sound like. But what was really awesome was we got to talk about a lot of the really taboo stuff. So things like about the judgment that is thrown around a lot with infidelity. I had that happen with my experience. You know, people expected me to like drop everything, move out of my house and start life anew somewhere else. And everyone was like willing to help me do that. But bucking that, everybody like fell away and they were like, what are you doing? This is toxic. This is bad. And all of the other judgments that sort of come with it, like, oh, relationships can never recover and it'll never be the same and stuff like that. It was really a delicious conversation to sink into.
It is, and it really is a conversation about, you know, how do we make that decision whether to stay or to go? And regardless of which choice we make, how can we make that choice consciously and still recover, you know, regardless of which choice we make? If we choose to stay, how do we recover within the relationship? How do we recover not just the trust, but repair the bond so that we actually want to engage back in that relationship, you know, wholeheartedly? And I think that does take a lot of courage and a lot of guts. And it was just such an amazing conversation. So yeah, it was, you know, do we stay, do we go? And if we do choose to go, how do we still recover when we go? How do we be able to keep our self-esteem intact? How do we not beat ourselves up when we're the ones that were betrayed? And we beat ourselves up so much. And then we just end up layering even more limiting beliefs and crush our self-esteem even more. So even if we choose to go, how do we make the decision to go? How do we get the support to heal and recover?
Actual support, not the fake stuff.
Yeah. And also, most importantly, that we get to recover so we don't go into another relationship and recreate the same betrayal, which happens so many times.
Oh my God, doesn't it ever? And it's just such an incredible conversation that I wish I had had access to back when I was going through all of my stuff in my relationship, because there was nothing like this around. I went scouring the internet for stuff and I found like one audiobook by a guy in England and it was, you know, it covered a lot, but it didn't cover what I needed it to, which is what this conversation did.
Yeah.
So, yay, I got a bit more closure out of it than I expected, even though this was years ago.
But it's such a brilliant conversation. It's such a much needed conversation. And we hunted for someone who would have this conversation with us, and not just a general relationship coach like myself, but someone who this is their expertise. This betrayal, infidelity is their area. So I could have been more happy than to have had Tzara on board and to just be so willing to share her own personal story, you know, and to just share all of her wisdom and her knowledge that she brings to the table as well.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. So stay tuned because we have so much coming up in this conversation with Tzara. It's going to fill your mind and your heart and maybe even kickstart a little bit of healing for you if you've got some residual stuff, or maybe you're going through it right now. Either way, we hope it's really, really helpful for you.
Yeah, and if you do have stuff that comes up, you know, you can obviously contact Tzara, or you can contact myself as well. So don't go through this and get triggered and, you know, fall apart or go into beating yourself up. This is a really beautiful conversation and you're going to absolutely love it.
And you'll find all of the links if you do want to get in touch with Tzara or Verity. They're all in the show notes, especially if you want to find Zara's got like a 30-minute session I think she's doing for free. There's information on that in the show notes as well, and you can get in touch with Verity. Everything's in the show notes, guys. Everything. Let's go to the show notes. And I look forward to hearing what you guys think about this episode as well. So keep sharing your thoughts and your responses to that with us.
Well, I'm so excited today, Ashley, to have Tzara Atwell with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Tzara.
Welcome.
Hi, Verity. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, so one of the reasons to have Zara, pretty much the only reason to have Zara on, was because I was actually researching infidelity, and it kind of hit me that this is something that we don't talk about. You know, if we go back to those good girl rules where we want to be polite, where we, don't want to. We want everyone to think the best of us. We don't want people. And I always just remember my mum just saying, never air your dirty laundry in public. And this is one of those topics, I think, that so falls into that category.
Yeah,
And we don't talk about it, and yet it is so common.
it's really common. It's something like 1 in 4 relationships in Australia are affected by some kind of infidelity or betrayal, and one of the major reasons why people separate.
Which is crazy. Like 1 in 4 relationships that's not a small number.
No,
That's
no.
a lot of people.
Is
Yeah.
there any understanding or research about why betrayal is so common?
Look, I think from the research that I've done so far, Esther Perel talks quite a bit about it. With the advent of the internet, it's more prevalent now. It's easier now to do the sexting, get online dating, watching porn. It's quite easy to get involved in that way, but also similarly, it's just as easy to be found out.
Because I think I've heard as well Esther Perel talk about it, and she was saying, I think one of the biggest reasons is a lack of passion.
Lack of
That-
desire.
She talks about the keeping the interest alive, so keeping the curiosity curious, to be able to keep that interest alive, so to keep some kind of mystery around the relationship itself, and do something a little bit out of the norm, and so that there isn't the monotony there.
Yeah. And I think that's what happens, doesn't it, in everyday life? Like while we're trying to juggle like children or, school stuff or jobs or promotions or, trying to figure out mortgages or bills or
Exactly.
any curveballs that life throws us at a daily basis. Like it's so easy for us to take advantage of our relationships and ignore them and neglect them and not actively invest in them on a daily basis.
That's right. To take the just the monotony, we just sort of become too tired, and it's no longer important, or we're no longer making the effort for each other.
Oh,
Yeah, I think I remember when I got divorced years ago, I was reading this book about marriage, and it was saying one of the biggest reasons of divorce was this lack of passion, and it wasn't because couples were arguing at all. And they were saying couples that argued actually tended to stay together more, and they said it was literally the couples that weren't arguing that had really nothing to discuss, that had nothing to actually bond them together.
being indifferent to each other.
Yeah, just boredom, I think, was more of what they were getting at. And I think like what you were saying as well, Zara, is so true. Like with the internet being so prevalent, it's so easy for us to get sidetracked. It's so easy for us to get distracted.
Yeah.
It's so easy for us to be lured by, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence.
And by the same token, it's so much easier to be found out. I mean, I've got clients that have found out because a message came through on their partner's iPad while they were away, and that unveiled a whole series of photos or images that they just would not have found out normally. Very innocent behavior, but it's like these separate lives that we're living in a virtual reality, online existences.
I've heard about that with parents that have accidentally linked their kids' iPads to theirs, and their kids have started to get
or
personal messages. And they've gone to the closest parent who's not at home and gone, well, what's this? And it's not funny, but it's kind of it's crazy how easy it can be to get found out.
The innocence of children, huh? They come up and find, like I'm saying, the playing games on the iPad. The kids are picking up the iPad and messages are coming through. And just like you're saying, they're going, well, what's this message? And they're showing it to the nearest adult. And that might not be the one that's supposed to be seeing the message.
Exactly. It's usually not. So why is it that the person who gets betrayed is usually the one that carries the most shame when the betrayal isn't even their behavior?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's Esther Perel talks about it as being a crisis of identity. And MJ Dennis, who I've done a lot of study into, she's a trauma expert, and a licensed therapist specializing in sex addiction, especially for the betrayed. Now, she talks about this. There is a primal panic that takes place when we find out about the betrayal. There's an attachment distress. So we identify with being in the partnership, but then we go into this shock when we find out that it's not what we thought it was, and that fight, flight, or fright mode kicks in, or freeze mode, kicks in. Yeah, it creates this crisis of identity, this attachment distress.
So what actually is detachment distress?
Well, we all have the amygdala, which is in the frontal lobe of our brains, and
that little bit of our brain has so much to answer for.
It sure does. It talks about it's linked to how we process emotions, and it's really there to protect and secure us. As children, when we're born, we've got an attachment to security, and we need to be cared for and loved and nurtured. And then as we grow older and we get to school, we have like that buddy system. Do you remember at school, and we went on school excursions, and you'd have to have a buddy, and if you got into the assembly lines or your homework buddies, there was this buddy system. So as adults, we choose a partner as part of that buddy system, and the subconscious message is the relationship I've got. I've got you, you've got me. That kind of idea of that. And so, as I was saying before, people who are betrayed experience attachment distress, which is that loss of identity being wrapped up with the partner. This is what Esther Perel talks about, calling it a crisis of identity. And it's the amygdala that lives in our temporal lobe and is linked to the processing of emotions. So it's been known historically for processing fearful emotions. So when there's anything threatening stimulus is present in the environment, it's the one that kind of gets us going and identifies the threat. So we either fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah, I always get them mixed up.
Fight, flight, or freeze. So do you know what you girls do when you're stressed? What do you tend to do? Do you tend to fight or flight or freeze?
I'm a freezer.
I think it depends. If my children are involved, it's fight.
Yeah, right.
If it's just me involved and it's a personal relationship, I probably do flight really well. And I think if it's professional, like in the professional arena, I probably freeze, because I want to think really long and hard, check everything, make sure I don't want to make a move in case it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
So I think I do the 3 different ones in different areas.
Different ways, right.
Like the fight is for my children, the flight is to protect myself in a personal situation, and then the freeze would be like, holy shit, what did I do wrong? What do I need to know? How do I get out of this?
So isn't it interesting when you're impersonalizing it in that way? What did I do wrong? What are you blaming yourself for when you're in that situation of?
Yeah. But I think professionally, if my manager's told me off and I feel like, oh, I've stuffed up somewhere, and I want to double check that I haven't.
Yes. Okay. I understand. So in a situation with a betrayal, when you've just, the discovery's happened, and the betrayed has found out about the unfaithful, if they're in a fight kind of mode, they'll tend to get angry at the ex and feel vengeful and defend ourselves from that anger perspective. If they're in that fright framework, they'll run away, potentially with all sorts of fears and frames about that as shame on themselves and blaming themselves, but running away to hide, to get secure. And in that freeze mentality, they do nothing. It's as if they're numbing themselves to the pain, like a paralysis state, just hoping that they won't get hurt.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think back to my experience of this, and I don't think I actually froze much. I ran away. I went and stayed with a friend, and I was very angry.
Yeah. So this is what happens. There's an experience, there's a response to the experience, and then there's also a grief response to the loss. So there's a twofold thing happening. So the amygdala deals with the experience and gets you into safety, and then you start processing all the post-traumatic stress disorder reactions through pain, anger, the grief of loss.
Yeah.
So that's where the shock of the experience can be really deep and really profound, and creates that primal panic that I mentioned earlier. It's a deep animalistic fear that you're not okay in the world. Yeah, the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Wow.
I always find them so fascinating when you go through them, because it's so interesting to actually break them down and, I guess, like, use a personal experience to go through them and really understand how much we do follow, not a procedure, but a process.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating.
It's so true. I mean, it's like, how you consume food. The body goes through a certain process in order to kind of get that food and the nutrients through your system. It's the same with any kind of pain, basic thing, that we go through a process in order to manage it and be able to get it out through our system. And those are just the various stages that we go through. And knowing that is what's so important in being able to help the betrayed person get through and navigate through those emotions, and to not let them blame themselves and that this is something wrong with them.
Well, this brings up a really good question. Do people recover from betrayal? Is that even possible? Is that a thing?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I think that you can turn that experience into something more powerful for yourself. I think that it definitely changes people, but it's up to the individual how they're going to actually process it. And with help, being able to talk to professional people, being able to navigate your way through it with understanding, rather than layering it with more limiting beliefs, more shame or more guilt about the things that have happened that don't serve you. Being able to navigate over the top of that and work through those feelings is what coaches and myself and Verity are in the field of helping.
And I think that's so important what you said. Like, one of the things I guess we don't realize is when we go through something traumatic, such as betrayal, is that we can so easily fall into the pit of layering, like you said, even more limiting beliefs, like spiraling downwards in our beliefs and collecting more beliefs that actually do not support us or help us. And it's interesting, I think, I've dated like for the last decade as a single parent in my 30s. And, by that time, when you're meeting other single people, you meet a lot of people who have been betrayed, especially like a lot of people, at that point of divorce when you're dating, or they've already dated, but, they're not in loving marriages because they wouldn't be dating. But it's so fascinating to hear their stories and to hear their beliefs and how hard some of them really do find it to trust again, after being betrayed.
Trust is the biggest one. Trust is really the biggest one, because everything you believed about the relationship up until that point becomes a lie, or you question yourself, you question your ability to make good decisions, trust others. And that's where that crisis of identity comes in. Who am I if I'm not in the relationship and I don't trust myself to choose the right relationship?
And I think that is it, Tzara. Like, that is like the key to it. It's not that we don't trust other people, we actually stop trusting ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's
where people start moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a powerful thing when we realize it's us that don't trust us.
Yeah. We forget that we have the power, or we have the choice to start trusting again, because we've been so hurt. We've been so that shock, that primal panic that goes on, thinking that everything that we knew about the world suddenly changes, is that's definitely something that happened to me in my own experience with betrayal.
Can you share your story with us?
Sure.
Yay, she said. Martinis all around.
I essentially walked in on my best friend and partner of 10 years in bed together. So I have that image of their naked bodies burnt in my mind's eye. It's there whenever I recall it. And that's all I can remember really in any detail. And the next, the next sort of 72 hours after that were just a bit of a blur. I went into runaway mode. I went a bit numb, and I was in such shock. Literally the following 3 days afterwards, I can barely remember anything about it. My friend had been staying with us for the weekend, and she was there on the Friday night, and we were up having drinks, and it was getting a bit late, and so I decided to go to bed. My partner was going to go away with his ex-wife and the kids for a skiing weekend, and I was going to have the weekend with my girlfriend to celebrate and just party. So I went off to bed, and about 2:30 in the morning, he'd still not come back to bed. So I walked downstairs in my dressing gown and found them in the guest bedroom. So I was upstairs in the house, in the house when it had been going on. And it was only later that I found out that it had been going on for 1.5 years. So they were obviously quite comfortable about having sex with each other, to the point where they were being, it was getting more risk until I actually walked in on them. So, that's really my story. And I had to pack up my life of 10 years with this partner in about a couple of weeks, and I left. And it was definitely the shame of trying to work out who knew. Why didn't I know this? How had it been going on for so long? I felt stupid. And that's where all the layering started to happen, the limiting belief of, I'd been taken for a ride, I'd been taken advantage of. My trust had been completely shot. I didn't trust my friend. I never spoke to her again. It was just a very, dark time. And I didn't realize at the time that I could get help in this area. I'd gone to my doctor and was given sleeping tablets just to be able to cope and get through the day. I didn't realize that there were coaches like this specializing in this field.
Well, I think that's the thing though, Tzara. Like, I didn't know there were coaches that specialize. Like, I can work with relationships, and that's where I guess I found you, because I was like, who actually specializes in betrayal? Because it's such a massive conversation and there's so much to it. And, I could spend 3 months working with someone on their relationship, but you could work with someone for 3 months just on betrayal and not even on any other part of the relationship.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's so specific and it's so in depth. And I actually don't know any specialists that specialize in this area until I stumbled across you, and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, there are lots of kind of marriage guidance, but like you say, there's not many specializing in this particular field, and so it can make the betrayed person feel even more isolated and retreat more into not talking about it. It's not something that people tend to talk about because of the shame and the guilt and the beating themselves up. And so it's a really, really important field. It's a really, really important area for coaches to specialize in and really be there for these people. I managed to eventually find some help after a couple of years and started to really do the work on myself. And when I found how important it was to be able to get rid of these limiting beliefs, to stop blaming myself, to pull back the trust, and more importantly, to get the confidence back. My confidence had been completely shot as a result. The trust was massive. Trust was a really, really big one. And just starting to love myself and recognize that it wasn't my fault, that it wasn't part of it. It just wasn't my fault. My partner my ex-partner, I found out later, it wasn't the first person he'd cheated on me with. There were multiple people. And as I'm learning more about this particular field, there's a real issue with sex addiction of partners, that have got this sex addiction and that they can't do anything about it. And it's like alcohol addiction.
Yeah.
Not that I'm discounting anybody that's going through this situation, but it's all a very real situation. It's all very real, and how we process in it, just in the same way when we're in a frightening situation, whether we run away or whether we paralyze ourselves, everybody deals with it internally in a different way.
It's so true.
That makes so much sense, the sex addiction component, especially, if you do find out that your partner has been with multiple people and they see no reason to keep stopping or something of that nature. Like, I can imagine, not that it's going to be super comforting, but I imagine that it helps bring some reason to what's going on.
Yeah, because that's all you're trying to do. You're trying to work out, well, what was my involvement in it? How did I facilitate this? How did I help do this? Is there something wrong with me? Or, does the other woman look more beautiful than me? You start comparing yourself to other people. And it's just, if you think of it as being, not in all cases, but in some cases where there is an addiction happening, it'd be similar to alcohol addiction. But similar in the sense of, well, I'm going to have a wine, or I'm just going to have another wine, or then we go on to more spirits, or
and then not being able to resist, and knowing that you're making bad choices, but feeling like the behavior or the desire is kind of out of your control.
And they're not taking responsibility for it. The difference between sex addiction and something like alcohol addiction is that sex is a fundamental core reason for our existence, right? We can't not have sex for the procreation of humanity. So whereas you cannot have alcohol and, it's not going to be the end of humanity as we know it. Stop in that way. But the addiction part of it, the component of addiction to something that's causing so much pain and suffering, is what needs to be addressed. But I don't work with those sex addicts. I worked with the people who have experienced the betrayal.
Yeah, and it's so needed because it is so crushing. And like we've just been saying, when you have been betrayed, we question our whole self-worth. Like, was it because we weren't good enough? Were we not pretty enough? Were we not sexy enough? Were we just not enough for this person? Like, they needed something that we couldn't offer them. They went and sought it elsewhere. Like, it's so easy just to fall into that whole, I guess, downward spiral of beating ourselves up.
Yeah.
When part of the truth is that maybe it really had nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
And that behavior belonged to the other person.
Well, we have a responsibility to ourselves to be able to take responsibility for our part in things. But in a sex addiction relationship, we can only go so far before we have to say, well, this is to do with the other person. It's not something that I can control or do something about. So we feel emotionally exactly what you're saying, that we start blaming ourselves, and that can take us into a very negative spiral and unhealthy headspace, because we take it all on board as if it's all our fault. It takes two to tango. There's another person involved in that situation.
Yeah, and I think what else comes up really interesting from my experiences and experiences of things that friends have gone through and clients have gone through as well, is that with betrayal, we always kind of also have a tendency to demonize the person who betrayed us, and sometimes also ignore our responsibility in that. And I have known a few incidences where the partner who was betrayed wasn't always such a great partner.
Right.
And the betrayal wasn't against that person. It's just because that relationship deteriorated. That relationship became somewhat toxic, and the other person just happened to meet someone and that relationship wasn't toxic. That relationship, there was, love there. And so then the person's just made some bad decisions of detangling themselves from a toxic relationship into a healthier relationship. And that's also been really interesting. And it's really sort of challenged my mind on trying to be very neutral when I do work with people who've said that they've been betrayed. Because I think there's always a sense where we can bring things back to ourselves and not blaming ourselves, not shaming ourselves, not beating ourselves up, but looking at, okay, where was my responsibility in this?
Yeah.
And it was really interesting having worked with clients as well who've had to look at their behavior and go, do you know what? I was away so much. I was neglecting so many of their needs. I wasn't there when they needed me. I was caught up with all of my stuff. And then they go, oh my gosh, like I can totally see why my partner, someone else walked in and was there for them and did this for them and nurtured them and cared for them and did all the things I was meant to do.
Yeah.
And they were just like, shit, okay, I get it. And it's not blaming anyone in particular, because that person that betrayed still did the bad behavior. But, sometimes there's definitely room for the person who's been betrayed to see it as an opportunity. And that may be really hard to swallow.
Mm.
To go, okay, where was my responsibility in this? If there was any responsibility, what can I learn from this?
Mm.
What did I learn about my boundaries? What did I learn about my self-worth? And
In
what is
the
it that I need to change moving forward to not ever experience that again?
Yeah, yeah. In the initial stages, this is part of that process of going through the grief. In that initial stages, there's a shock element, and there is a lot of self-blame that I've experienced with my clients that they go through. If only this, if only that, if only I was slimmer, and it can get that initial blame is one part of the process. But then when you come out of that, there can be a lot of anger, and that's when you can start not taking responsibility for stuff that you have done, your part in the process with the partner. But there is a process, and initially when you're going through the shock, if you've just made a discovery and you're going through that, it's really, really important to be kind to yourself, to what I call is get sensory, and just do the things that are really nurturing to the senses. So just to be really kind to yourself in the beginning, because you're trying to nurture, you're going through that. There's so much loss, that there's the shock of the betrayal, then you've lost your partner potentially, or you're trying to keep that. But maybe I should talk about that separately. You're beating yourself up, you're going through that sense of loss. So it's really important to try and just take care of yourself and, have warming baths. I talk about getting comfortable with a really beautiful blanket and just keeping yourself nurtured in that way. Maybe taking long walks, try and get out in nature, because there is that tendency to hide away, to not talk to anybody. You're trying to make sense of what happens, and you're going in your mind about all the various conversations that have happened, and when he told me that he was going out here, then that must have meant he was going to do that. So it's so
torturous, isn't it?
It's torturous, yeah. It's that excessive thinking, that obsessive thinking, I call it, just about what the ex is doing, or what the unfaithful partner has been doing. So it's in that time when you're kind of just processing everything, it's really important to be kind to yourself. And then you'll go through the anger or the denial, or whatever the next stages are for you. That bargaining stage is very much about if I lose weight, or if I get myself a new haircut, will you love me? Will you want to come back with me? If we do that kind of bargaining state of trying to get back with the ex.
Yeah. And that can be so heartbreaking, I think, when you witness your friends go through that. Because you so believe in your friend's self-worth, but to witness someone go through that bargaining stage can be so heartbreaking.
Yes.
Um,
And you know, that you talk about friends in that way. When the friends are supporting the betrayed partner, there can be a real big split in friends, especially with long-term relationships where
yeah.
you've been together for so long and you've got similar friends. Then when something like this happens, it really affects the friends. I know in my situation, all of my circle of friends couldn't even look at him. Couldn't, you know, he'd been the best man at a couple of my friends' wedding, and they couldn't speak to him again. They couldn't look at him again. You know, there was this real split between our friends, which again perpetuates that you know, that the difficulty that goes on with something this strong within sexual betrayal. It's really a big deal.
It's massive.
It's
Because
huge.
I think that's the thing, isn't it, with the betrayal? Like, family can feel betrayed, you know, friends can feel betrayed. Like, anyone who took your partner in, who, you know, celebrated with partner, like you were saying, if they were the best man at a wedding,
Yeah.
like the whole community around you, like that sense of betrayal can become so more compounded by the feelings of, you know, like your family and friends, or if there's children in the relationship.
Oh, if there's
Um,
children, yeah.
it can be massive.
Yeah, like yourself, you had children you were talking about with your partner.
Yeah. You know, and they've asked us questions because if they heard some gossip the other weekend about one of us having betrayed the other one, and the eldest one was she came home and she's like, I want to know the truth. And I was like, are you sure you want to know the truth? She's like, yep, I want to know. And
Yeah.
it was really heartbreaking because, as we're told as parents, keep our kids out of it. But when someone drags them straight into the middle, especially with lies and gossip, malicious lies and gossip, you have a responsibility to give them the truth. You know, I did it. I'm really lucky. I've got an amazing support group and people that I know that are psychologists. And so being able to chat with them and say, okay, where are the ethics of this? And they're like, no, child's been fed lies. She needs to be told the truth. She's in an age where it's appropriate for her. She's asked for the truth. You have to, you know, feed her the truth little bit by little bit until she's just enough truth that she stops asking questions.
Yes.
You know, so there's with this conversation could go on in so many different ways because there's so many elements. I know people are listening who've been betrayed. They'll want to know more about that conversation, but it will take away, you know, from the rest of the conversation. You know, like, how do we deal with all these elements? How do we deal with our family and friends when they're at us saying, you've got to leave them, they're a terrible person, they're an asshole or bitch, if it was, a female that betrayed, and I know Ashley and I were talking about this earlier, that peer pressure to leave and abandon the person that's betrayed us, there's so much support for that. And yet there's so little support for people like, do you know what, I want to try and make this work. And they get told that they're stupid. They get told, I hear it so often, what's an intelligent woman like you doing with a man like that? How did such a smart person like yourself get involved in a situation like this? Like, we're so attuned by society to be deemed as stupid or dumb because someone else did something to us that we might not have had any control over.
The example you're giving, exactly that. If, married partners want to stay together and kind of work through the betrayal and be able to honour the vows that they've had. But I've had clients that have felt even more isolated by staying in the relationship and trying to work through a betrayal when their friends are saying exactly what you're saying. You're an intelligent woman. What are you doing staying with him? He's cheated on you. You should leave him. And they're feeling even more isolated, that they've not got the support from their friends. They're facing the whole emotional gamut of blame and victimization in that, and yet staying in the relationship in order to make it work because that goes with their values of the marriage. And like you say, there may be kids involved. There is such a plethora of emotions that go on in this kind of situation. The tentacles so far-reaching. Like we talked about the friends that are affected. It's not just the single act, that single selfish act of sex with another person in an affair or an infidelity. The ripple effects are incredible.
Huge.
And can go on for years, even after the relationship is over. If that's what happens, the betrayal and discovery ends the relationship, if that's what happens, you can still be processing those feelings of blame, distrust for years and years if you don't get to speak to somebody about it.
You know, that's
Yeah.
incredible. And that's kind of exactly what happened in my relationship. My partner had an affair a few years ago now.
Yeah.
That was horrible because I made them, well, now I can say it was a boo-boo, but at the time I didn't know it was. I made the boo-boo of speaking or trying to ask for support from my friends and from my family. And I had those expectations, like literally my mum drove to my house. She never does. And was like, I'm here to help you pack and move out. And I was like, but I never said once that I was doing that.
Right.
And, you know, there was all of these people galvanizing support to help me move house and start life again.
Yeah.
But the second I said, actually, that's not what I want to do, we're going to try and work through this, because even if we do split up, both of us are still going to be really damaged from the split. We need to see a therapist regardless. And the second I said that, all the support dried up. Nobody wanted to know anything. They basically said, no, you've made your bed, lie in it.
Yeah, right. What that brings up is that for you to be able to stay in that relationship and try and overcome the road hump that you're going through as part of the betrayal, takes immense amount of courage. And that's what people, I'm realizing, aren't seeing, that incredible courage. And you're calling upon the reason why you got involved in the relationship in the first place, and you're being there for each other to help each other overcome it. It takes an incredible amount of courage that friends and family don't really see, especially in this digital age, where they'll just be like, oh, there's plenty more fish in the sea, or
yeah, just get on Tinder.
Just get on Tinder, just get on online dating. And it devalues the sanctity of the relationship that you're trying to save. And I think there's a lot of power in attempting to do that, but it's not for the faint-hearted, and not everyone can do it. Yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted, and being able to have that dedication to each other, I think that we so forget that, and there's a lot of honor in doing that if you can overcome it. And where I put that caveat in is if the person is a sex addict or is going to do repeat behavior, that you then have to take a look at yourself and say, at which point am I now in a very, very unhealthy relationship? I think I use this term loosely because of the area that I'm specializing in, but I think it's important to be able to forgive yourself and forgive someone else, but then have the courage and strength that keeps you in that relationship to get out when it's no longer serving you and it becomes toxic. And that's the fine line.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
it really is such a fine line, isn't it? And I think that's why it's so important to get help. So that you can find that fine line or navigate all of those obstacles, all of those tentacles, and like you said, dealing with the lack of support, dealing with the ramifications and ripple effects that might affect children or family members or your own community. This is a minefield.
Yeah, and the children is just a whole nother area. And we're talking about people that are married as well as just being in long-term relationships with children, without children. It's such a big area, and we don't really give it enough credit of how impactful this sexual union is until we're actually in it or experiencing it for ourselves. I'm imagining from the unfaithful, it's just like, oh, it won't matter, they won't find out, it's just, it doesn't mean anything, I still love my partner. But it changes things. It changes, the world before you found out about the betrayal and the world afterwards.
They are very two different places.
And I think as well in this conversation, it's probably just important for anyone that is listening who identifies as polyamorous, that infidelity and polyamorous are slightly different things. But a very good friend of mine identifies as polyamorous, but they're very, very honest. Yeah. And I think that's the difference. They're very, very honest in their relationships, and it's always how all of their relationships start with the honesty of being polyamorous, that sometimes that will just be their one partner. Other times someone else might come along.
That's right.
And there's no planning about it. It's just how they are. And I've known this person a very long time, and they are a deeply beautiful human being, a very loving human being, that this is just the way that they show up in the world and see the world. But they have so much integrity and so much honesty. And they admit as well, it does make, they might be really attracted to someone, and that person might want to have a relationship with them. And then, they have the conversation about being polyamorous, and they know that they risk that that person might walk away or judge them or be like, that is not for me. And they're aware that they will often get rejected, but they still have the dedication and the honesty of putting it out there, of being honest with the people that they may meet as potential partners or partners. And I respect that as well. But that, for anyone who's listening and who, polyamorous might be a thing for them, that maybe they've not had the conversation and therefore it shows up as infidelity, I just think it's a really important comment just to make, that honesty is so integral.
And that's the key thing, Verity, that you're mentioning. It's full disclosure, and that's the real difference between somebody that's being deceitful and lying about their sexual exploits to somebody that's being polyamorous. I mean, there is a full disclosure and a full honesty about it, and you have that choice if you want to enter into a relationship with somebody who's doing that. The choice is being removed from somebody when they're being dishonest and betraying and having sexual partners with and pretending to be something else.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Ashley, could I ask, did you continue with the relationship after the betrayal? What actually happened? I'm interested to know if that stuck out.
Yeah, we're still together. He's in the other room right now doing I don't know what.
Right. Okay. And did you speak to somebody to help you through that, or what?
Yeah, we did. Well, I won't say that we didn't have problems when this all came out. We did, and I threw things at him, and I stomped my foot, and I cried, and
Right.
it was really ugly, but we did get a little bit of help. It wasn't the best help we've ever had, but I will say that it really shook things up and opened both of our eyes to things that really weren't working. So we ended up actually having a really big catharsis together where we said all of the things that we both needed to change for the relationship to work.
Right.
And it turned out that it was often a lot of really small everyday things. So for us, it was like, okay, we have to do our grocery shopping together, not separately or never. And we have to have at least a couple of meals together at the dining table, a few times a week. And it was things like, okay, you have to take dinner a bit more. You have to take charge of cooking meals and providing those meals for us a bit more often. So we actually still stick by those rules. So now it's like, we do dinner on a rotating basis. Who's in charge of dinner and meals? We do our groceries together still. And it helped. It was really bloody hard. It was some of the hardest work I've done, but so worth it.
Well, what you're talking to there is boundaries as well. What I've found with people that are healing within the relationship and trying to make it work, they set boundaries, and that becomes a really important factor. That the unfaithful and the betrayed are meeting together within a set of rules that they have defined for themselves, that they are going to show up, work towards, work with each other within, in order to save the relationship. And the unfaithful has to come to the party as much as the betrayed. And that's what makes it such a beautiful but such a challenging and difficult work.
Yeah, it was incredible. There were times I really wanted to pack it all in and go, this is too hard.
Right.
But even, if we're talking about intimacy again, and how do you, one of the big things I really struggled with was, how on earth can I be intimate with this person again after all of that hurt?
Yeah.
And that was a huge, like almost a whole other, tendril of this conversation. But it's going to sound a little bit contradictory. I think it actually led to much deeper intimacy than we had before.
Right.
And it meant that, you know, the first time that my partner proposed was right before I found out that this had been happening. But it actually led to, and, you know, it was a nice proposal, but it led to, when we were in the process of recovery from this, a much more intimate and meaningful second proposal.
Oh, right.
It was
I
really
think
lovely.
that's the thing though, isn't it, Ashley? Like with all the things that you put in place there, and it's really, I love how, like, you know, we kind of pick up on different things, and Zara's like, wow, like she can see the boundaries that get put in place that help create trust. And I'm looking at listening to you and I'm like, oh, I can see the bonding, like the things of having to have, you know, dinner a few times a week together, like having those rules of having to spend time together, having to do tasks together, that you bring back the bonding.
Yeah.
You know,
And
and that also
yeah.
creates the trust.
It
And I
so
do
wasn't
think,
easy.
no, not at all. But I think isn't that commitment? Like we think commitment is when you say I do, and it's not. Anyone can commit to anything that looks like a cute little fairy tale. It's when things get ugly and we decide, right, are we committed to this, or are we going to walk away? Like I think that's where we show commitment to ourselves, to our relationship, and how we want to show up.
And not
I
everyone
think,
agrees with what I've done, and they're not part of our lives anymore, because we just said, we're going to give this a go because this is important, and it's going to it has upended both of our lives.
yeah.
So we need to decide what to do. And, you know, it did lead to leaving people out of our lives and going, okay, well, if that's your opinion, that's fine, but you're not going to be part of our lives anymore, because it's just going to be toxic.
Yeah. And you know, no one needs all the other judgment from other people when you're trying to sort out your own lives. That's kind of the thing though, isn't it? Like that's where you were saying, like the boundaries come in and the bonding comes in, the more open communication, the more honesty, the more transparency, the more feelings, the more self-awareness. And that, you know, if that can be done, and I do think it takes special people, like Anne was saying, you've got to be, you know, it's not for the faint-hearted. But if people can work through this stuff and both people become transparent, both people become honest about their emotions and their feelings, and both people are willing to listen to the other one, and both people are willing to accept their shortcomings in whatever way, like there can be so much more growth.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
And
yes.
such a deeper, intimate relationship.
The whole boundary issue, or the whole boundary setting, should I say, when you're in that relationship where the infidelity or the betrayal has taken place, there is that crossing of the boundary. What you expected has been betrayed, right? And so you're having to reclaim that land back, reclaim the boundary and the territory that you feel is yours inside. So whether you stay or whether you leave, having that, what I say is you can't hold a boundary until you believe the territory inside it is yours.
Ooh, I like that.
So you know,
chills.
You're staying with your partner, your husband, I assume, and you've defined those boundaries because you have a value system about what that territory means to you and where that boundary is, and when he's going to cross it or not, and whether that's just going out and having dinner together, and he has, you know, if he tells you that he's going out and he has to phone you, or whatever the boundaries are that you're setting. But similarly for a partner that's with a sex addict that has now decided, I'm not staying in this relationship, you're crossing too many of my boundaries, this territory is being violated and I'm out of here, because they're recognizing what is theirs. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier about taking ownership for your part in a toxic relationship, taking your part of ownership.
Yeah, I often look at it, and when I'm being completely honest here, this is not my super feminist moment right now. But often, like, I hear friends who go through this stuff and they're like, oh, my partner cheated on me, or, you know, something happened, you know, maybe it was just a kiss or something happened, and they want to leave their partner. And often I find myself going, you don't have to do that unless you actually want to. And I find I find myself wanting to tell people that before you make a decision, just consider if that is something that you're doing because society tells you it's something that you should do,
Yeah.
or if it's something that you actually want and need to do for yourself.
Yeah. It's
So
so true. I actually, when I was, I think it was about 18, 19, 20, I was dating a guy, and he had a horrific motorbike accident. And so we ended up being very, very closely bonded with each other. And, you know, I supported him through, I think, a good year or so of rehab, like medical rehabilitation, not not drug rehab. And he ended up cheating on me. I just could not forgive him and the whole thing. I literally went straight into flight, walked out, never spoke to him again. And it was funny because we ended up getting in contact a couple of years later. And it was really sad because my anger and my resentment and my inability to look at myself or to own myself or to look at my own self-awareness. And you know, that kind of really prevented any forgiveness from happening, and the two of us actually being able to have a healthy relationship. And so we both ended up older in our lives, both re-partnering with other people. We both ended up having children with other people. But whenever we got together, and he died a few years ago, but whenever we got together, people around us were always just like, you two should have been together. And even with him having been repartnered, he had best friends that whenever I bumped into them, they were like, you know, he still constantly always talks about you behind closed doors. And, you know, there was so much sadness and regret and resentment between us. So he had so much sadness and regret, and I had so much resentment, that we never took that opportunity to be able to figure it out and grow. And when he passed away, I remember that absolutely broke my heart, because I'd never had the opportunity to resolve anything for someone who I know truly did love me and I truly loved them. And I remember even my mother saying, you know, when he died, and it's funny because his wife and I never ever spoke, but when he was quite sick, and there was 2 times when she called me and she said, you need to come to the hospital, this might be the end. And then the final time she would text me, and I would always text her and say, I'd like to come to the hospital today, is it okay with you? And she's like, yep, that's fine. But we never met. She always gave me that space to come to the hospital. And you know, he was in a coma at that point, so it's not like we could have even conversations or anything. But she always knew that there'd been this very special bond between us, and she respected that. And it was a very sad situation. And when he did pass away, my mum always said to me, you know, I just feel like the two of you should have been together. And, you know, it's just, I guess illustrating the fact that we really do, you know, whenever betrayal does happen, it's not always worth cutting the person off, going into flight, shutting down, and removing that person from our lives without really having a safe person, you know, someone like yourself, Tzara, to be able to sit with and to be able to work through the feelings, work through the emotions, work through those limiting beliefs. So you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because some of these relationships, you know, could be saved and can be saved, and maybe some of them should be saved, and some of them should, you know, walk away with and leave behind. But if we don't have a safe space where there's no judgment, where there's not any hidden agenda, that we can really get to know ourselves about what it is we value, what it is we actually really want, we can save ourselves so much heartache.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I think, when we're quite savvy women in general, we kind of know when the relationship is worth saving or not. If we really tap into our heart of hearts, you kind of know whether there's just something wrong. When I look back at my own relationship, we had been renovating a house together, and everyone had said to me, you know, renovating is just, you're going to kill each other through this. It's just make or break a relationship. And, you know, we had been testy with each other and, you know, arguing over taps or paint color or whatever. It was a major renovation, but the betrayal was going on that entire time we were building the house together. And so my radar wasn't on hyper alert, but it was only after the discovery when I realized all of these conversations, all of these events, everything sort of fit into place. And then I found out that it wasn't just with my best friend, it was with other people too. That's when the decision for me was really like, it's not worth saving. It's not right. Whereas with both experiences that you're talking about, you know, you would have known in your heart of hearts if it's worth saving, and, you know, really, really worth saving, and that it's not just an obsessive need that you don't want to be alone and that you're going to hold on to this no matter what. At the risk of being a toxic relationship. And like you say, Verity, speaking with somebody to help you get through that and understand emotionally, if you're not able to understand or make a decision, often talking it out with someone is just the help that you need to be able to decide, is it worth staying or, you know, staying or going. That's the very, very first fundamental step that I cover when I'm going through this with somebody, just to understand what is it they really want, and understanding whether they're putting limiting beliefs on something that is definitely an unhealthy and toxic relationship.
Yeah, and it's just so important, isn't it, that like no experience is the same, and
That's right.
there are definitely relationships that should be left, but we can't, you know, we have this like almost blanket rule, like, you know, if you cheat on me, it's over.
Yep.
You know, it's a fair enough boundary for anyone.
Yeah.
But to have, you know, there were so many different things that can go on. I know a couple whose partner had very addictive behavior with drugs and alcohol, and they ended up having an affair with someone who was very, like, they've, you know, 3, 4, 5 years down the track, the person that they had the affair with, they're repartnered and living together and having the most beautiful relationship.
Yeah, right.
And they're both like, wow, I wish I'd found you earlier. I wish I'd known myself enough to have not chosen the wrong person to have committed to and start creating a life with.
Yeah.
And, you know, so while maybe the choices of untangling weren't the best choices, it's not necessarily like, because we seem to have this thing in our head where if someone cheats on someone, you know, well, that relationship will never work out, or they're
That's
such
right.
an asshole, or they're such a bitch.
That's right.
And I think that's why it's so important to not go into destroying someone or demonizing someone, and just having this, you know, black and white, I guess, conversation about betrayal, which is why I think today's interview is so beautiful, because we need to look at the different perspectives, and every single incident is unique, and will have different factors and different histories of the people and different personalities in there. And that, I think, again, is why it's so crucial for people to work with someone like you, Tzara, who's able to create that space for them.
Yeah.
So they can be seen, they can be heard, they can have their meltdowns.
Yeah.
They can, you know, I think I did margaritas and a lot of Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah. Well, like we've said, there's different people respond in different ways, and I've developed a program that really is like a 3-step program. The first step is to really understand the situation you're in for the very reasons that we've just been discussing, to decide whether after discovery, if you want to stay or if you want to leave. There is that process of having been unaware to now being aware, and then you've got all these decisions to make, and often at a time when you're just emotionally distraught. And so the first stage of my program is just to sort of understand the situation, get an understanding of your emotions, start giving yourself permission to just grieve, and start getting yourself back into a place where you can make a healthy decision. And then we go into the recovery, and exactly what we talked about before, taking responsibility, being able to see your part in it, and then start to understand the trust, who you are if you're not in the relationship, who you are if you are in the relationship, and developing those boundaries, because it's those boundaries that are going to help you regain the trust, regain the confidence, stop with all the limiting beliefs. So that's all part of that middle part of the program. And then finally I start looking at, well, your direction and your ability to choose and your ability to commit to yourself and self-care. And sometimes for some women that's about a whole new reinvention of themselves. So to come from the heartbreak into this whole new powerhouse of, you know, an empowered woman. We talked before about, can you actually get over the betrayal? And I've had some people say to me, you know, if it wasn't for that event, they wouldn't be where they were now. It doesn't mean that they've necessarily healed from it, but they've just changed their perception of it and turned it into a positive rather than a limiting belief that's going to hold them back, because we ultimately have the power to decide how we live our lives. We just can't see it when we put all these blocks in that I'm not worthy, I should be thinner, or I should be this, that, or the other, because of some trauma that's happened. So that's where I help. That's where I come in and try and tease out that and allow everything to be as it is, but without the blocks that are stopping you.
I love it. It's so beautiful. So how can our audience find you? If someone's listening and they're sort of like, oh, this is so resonating, and you know, I really need to, you know, speak to someone about this. Well, how can they find you?
Yeah, great question. It can jump onto my website, which is My Confidence Coach. So all one word, myconfidencecoach.com.au. You can jump onto what I call an intake session, which is completely free, where we can have a chat and I can hear your story, you know, where you will feel really heard and really understood, and find out whether it's something that I can work with you, and we can take it from there.
Oh, I love it. That's beautiful. Well, we will make sure that we have all those links attached to the podcast so that everyone can find them and hunt you down.
Great. That would be great. I've thoroughly loved enjoying talking with you both today and hearing your stories, and just, you know, it just confirms for me how deep this really goes. I mean, we mentioned before 1 in 4 people are affected by this, but if it's not you personally, you'll definitely know somebody that this has affected, and they may have brushed the feelings under the carpet, but internally processing things that are really not serving them.
Yeah. And also that's probably an important point to make as well. It's just that if you are the friend of someone who's, you know, opened up about a betrayal, that you don't go either straight into judgment, but try and hold that space for them and not compound the issue, and help them find the direction. Point them in Tzara's direction.
Yeah, point them in my direction.
Thank you so much for your time. We honestly appreciate it. We love having these conversations, and there's such much needed conversations that we just don't have, you know, on a daily basis.
Yeah. Thank you for providing the space for this to not just myself, but I'm sure many other people that use this podcast. It's such a great space, and thank you for taking the time.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, if you want to continue this conversation, head over to our Facebook page and be part of the revolution. You can find us at Good Girls Don't Podcast on Facebook. Please note, we cannot create change alone. Your support, likes, comments, shares, and iTunes reviews help us to give a voice to the insanely inspirational women and the controversial issues that we discuss.
If you'd like to be a part of our podcast, or if you have an issue that you have a burning desire for us to bring into the light, please contact us. With fierceness, Ashley
And Verity.
Get ready for the revolution.